We'll now hear from Israeli Tourism Minister Orit Farkash Hacohen in an interview with Michal Divon from the Khaleej Times.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the UAE-Israel Business Summit hosted by Khaleej Times and the Jerusalem Post. And we're so lucky to have a one-on-one with Israel's Minister of Tourism, Orit Farkash Hacohen. Welcome, Minister.
Thank you.
So one of the most natural industries to benefit from the Abraham Accords is, of course, tourism. COVID is, of course, an impediment to that. But how do you envision tourism between both destinations in the post-COVID-19 era?
Well, the Abraham Accords and the normalization agreements between the Emirates and Israel is a real, it's something that we can look forward to. And I think that what it brings together a combination of two countries who can make 1 + 1 bigger than 2. I think that when we're talking about the Israel aspiration with regards to tourism, then that we have a lot to hope for and to look up to. I spoke already a few times with the tourism and economic minister of the Emirates and the several Dubai and the other places in the Emirates with regards to tourism. And we're looking forward to having around 100,000 tourists from the Emirates. And I think that what's nice about this collaboration is that it is the best illustration of how governments sign contracts of normalization, but people who are the ones who are truly making peace. And there's nothing like tourism to create the connectivity and the informal, connection between these two amazing traditions and civilizations, the Israelis on one hand and the Emirates on one hand. Minister El-Fassi, the tourism minister of the Emirates, said a very nice some very nice words in a conference that we both participated in London last November of the WTM conference. And he said that the Emirates is known to have a lot of flavors of cultures of people from all over the world. And there's nothing like having now Israelis adding to this pot of flavors.
Now, you mentioned that Israel is expecting to host 100,000, big number, although we know that already more than 50,000 Israelis visited Dubai before quarantine was reimposed. What kind of interest are you seeing from the UAE, from Emirati tourists? What are you hearing on your end?
From what I see tremendous interest in all aspects that Israel can offer for any kind of tourist. You probably know that although Israel is a small country, it has everything for everyone. If we're talking about the snow-capped Hermon, if we're talking about an amazing desert views, if we're talking about business tourism, and if we're talking about ancient history like no other, if we're talking about places that are the cradles of the 3 religions around the world, we're talking about the Misgad al-Aqsa, the Al-Aqsa, we're talking about Nebi Musa, we're talking about lots of areas and places that are part of the history of Islam and of course of Judaism, of Christianity. So Israel can offer a lot to everybody. Now, in terms of business, from what I know, the Emirates as a gas and the oil-rich country is looking to the future. And in the future, they're looking at prospering or developing in areas such as renewable energy, technology, innovation, high tech. And in those areas, I think that there will be numerous places to collaborate on the commercial level. And in that sense, Tel Aviv is the capital of businesses of the Middle East. And we're looking forward to having and hosting all kinds of tourists from the Emirates. And I think that Israel is the perfect place to feel home away from home to the Emirates.
You mentioned some of the religious tourism aspects. I know a lot of Emiratis are very excited to be able to pray and visit the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Temple Mount. How is Israel going to make sure that Muslim worshippers from the Emirates feel safe when visiting the Temple Mount?
Usually speaking, on a day-to-day business, all religions visitors, when they go to the mosque, this is done as a daily thing. It is done, it is working, everybody's feeling very safe, and there's no problems with that. There was one specific event that I heard of, and it was the exception. It was not the rule. I hosted the tourism and economic ministry from Bahrain, El Zayani. He visited Al-Aqsa with no problems, and that is what we intend to do. We also prepared, like a round table with all the forces that are relevant for all our, new tourists from the new, Abraham Accord countries to make procedures even better and more smooth. And I think that in that sense, there is nothing new about tourists visiting the Al-Quds and the mosque and other places, and it is going to welcome them, naturally, respectfully, and as such a place that is so important to this religion should do. So I have no worries about it, and I think that as it operated before, it will continue to operate. And I think that it's a great privilege, for Israel to be a part of exposing all these beautiful pearls to this religion, and to be able to expose this to other and new people from the Emirates.
So another question that many people are asking me is, when will Israel reopen to tourists, and when will, of course, the different sects of tourism reopen, restaurants, culture? Of course, there's no way to predict, but looking at Israel's very successful drive to vaccinate the population, when do you expect we can see realistically Emiratis visiting Israel?
So this is exactly the $1 million question, like you said. But I think we're heading towards very good news. Like you said, Israel is among the fastest countries to get vaccinated. And, nearly 2 million Israelis already got the first shot of the vaccine. And, this week I will be the one taking the second portion, like many other Israelis. And we're talking about around the end of March time, where according to the Prime Minister, most of the adults in the state of Israel will be vaccinated already. And I think that if we're talking about the end of March, April, most certainly May, that will be the time when we will start opening the skies and having tourists back to Israel. As a Minister of Tourism, I'm very focused on that, on having a date, a destination in the calendar where I want to be the one to deliver the agents, the brokers, all the hotels in Israel that are working mostly with people like the Emirates that are coming, tourists that are not domestic. And I think that our challenge will be to give a date by which they will be able to prepare themselves in advance to such an important event of opening the sky. And I think it will be around April and so on. I hope that it will be even around Passover, which is at the end of March. But we'll see how things develop. I arranged a roundtable with the Minister of Health exactly for that purpose. We are sitting twice a week now to draw the line of how we give oxygen and we put the tourism sector back on business, back on its foot, in a new world of vaccinations. You have to understand that, I think, and I learned it even more during the COVID-19 prospects and the challenges, that tourism is not a privilege. It is, first of all, the most important thing for the soul, for having some ability to go to different places and to overcome the stress of the COVID-19, to go to different places, to enjoy, to relax, and it is very important for the health. Other than that, I think that, tourism is an economic engine for the economy, both in Israel and of course in the Emirates. And also in that aspect, we are creating collaboration between the two countries to do cooperation with regards to flight packages, to marketing packages. And I think that it is not long before we would see, packages, marketing flights that you can be in Dubai and in Tel Aviv, you can be in Abu Dhabi and in Jerusalem. And I think that's an amazing, it's an amazing thing.
You speak about tourism as food for the soul. In a previous interview, you also spoke about tourism as a means to bridging cultural gaps and building those cultural bridges. Maybe you can share a bit of your vision on that. And also you mentioned the joint summit. Are there any initiatives that you can share with us taking place?
First of all, what we have done is that we are rearranging and refurbishing our, website of the tourism ministry in Arabic. I think it is about time, and it is a great opportunity to do so. We published papers saying what to do and what not to do, culturally speaking, about people from the Emirates and Bahrain and Israel. We know that Israeli has a culture of being very live and being very talkative and very open. And we're like the Sabres, we have a lot of, we're very edgy on the outside and very sweet on the inside. And one of the things we wanted to pass over to the Israeli people is how to behave in those countries, how to respect the other cultures, the Islamic cultures, and so on. We are preparing, just like in the Emirates, about how to prepare food-wise. Some of the tourists from the Emirates will be keeping halal, the traditional, requirements of Islamic observing tourists, just as that some of Israelis are keeping kosher food limitation. We already initiated a big webinar, which I participated in, with the collaboration that initiated collaboration between agents and brokers and flight organizations and airlines of the two countries who are already preparing the day after the skies are open. And the business world, as you know, has made a great business conference in Dubai only a few months ago, where all the leaders of the Israeli business market, headed by Bank Leumi, came over to Dubai, and there was a big business meeting between the business community in the Emirates and the leading business community leaders of the Israeli business world. And, things are going on in a very big pace. And we're just hoping that the COVID-19, which is the biggest obstacle at the moment, will finally be cleared out of the way, so we could start, breathing, of course, progressing and being and having a healthier, a life around the world. And I think that once the skies open, thing will happen naturally. Even as we speak today, we have specific rules that allow business people to come from other countries, including the Emirates, to Israel. Now we are, during hopefully a last lockdown in Israel, together alongside with having the vaccinations in all around Israel. And I hope that once this is over, we can just open a whole new page of life.
Final question. You mentioned this being a very tough time. It is a very tough time for the industry, especially in Israel. How is the government going to help support the sector for the day after, when everything will open and there'll be this influx of tourists?
So first of all, we focused a lot of our efforts in the Ministry of Tourism and the government to maintain the infrastructure of tourism. When I'm talking about tourism infrastructure, we're talking about hotels, we're talking about village tourism, we're talking about tourist guide. We're talking about guides around the country. We're talking about, all the nature attractions and so on. So we were very focused on assisting them and aiding them financially. So once the skies open, they will be able to financially get up on their feet and start working. We have done that with several tools. First of all, there was a 300 million shekel compensation and aid fund that we established in the Ministry of Tourism that was given and actually is being distributed as we speak to different hotels in Israel that were basically shut down most of the time. During the times between the lockdowns, I fought for this industry in most of the villages tourism. We call it Tzimerim in Israel, little places in the kibbutzim, in the moshavim, in more rural, in the suburbs of Israel. When you come and you're being hosted in a private villa, most of them kept their operation so that their infrastructure will be still available the day after the COVID-19. The most interesting pilot that we have made, I don't know if you heard of that, was called the Green Tourism Islands. What we did in the government is something very special that was also taught and looked at around the world. We took two areas that are very highly affected by the tourism, which is one of a city in the south of the country called Eilat, which is the city next to Aqaba, and it was in a really bad shape because most of its employment and economy situation is dependent solely on tourism. The second one is the Dead Sea. And we created a special mechanism by which they were called the islands COVID-19 free. All the hotels were operating there, all the attractions and the restaurants and so on. And people just came in doing COVID-19 tests. And we had over 200,000 Israelis washing these cities, giving them some oxygen and helped them, gave them a little bit of relief during that time. And I'm very proud of that project because it proved that we could live with this disease, and it gave oxygen to nearly 50% of the domestic, to over 50% of the domestic tourism in Israel during the COVID-19. So these are a part of the things that we are doing. We're now working, like I said before, with the Minister of Health about what would happen the day after. Our focus is, of course, the organization that are dealing with coming tourism. We need to provide them with a date so they can start preparing for that. We gave money for commercials showing Natseret and the Dead Sea, around the world about Christmas time, reminding tourists that Israel is the place to be there and that it's important for Christians. And we did that as a way to remind why tourists should come to Israel. We gave also funds and we created a project by which tour guides were giving money to give free tours around the state of Israel for Israelis, just to give them some work. And we had another aid fund that helped the people, organizations that are organizing tours to Israel. And we gave them also, money, aid, in order for them to be able to maintain the people who are now preparing the day the skies are open. So these are all actions that we did specifically for the tourism. It is not enough, and I wish we could have done even more. But we keep working, and I'm very committed to this important sector in the state of Israel because, if I want to wrap it up again, it is people who sign, governments who sign the treaties, but people and tourists who are making the true peace. So I think it's a very big, a very big,
it's a big factor in creating.
It's a big message for me, and I'm very committed to this thing that is very important and has a message, not only economically, but also on the higher level.
Minister Orit Farkash Hacohen, our minister, Israel's Minister of Tourism, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your insight. We all look forward to that golden date and for the day when the skies will reopen so that Israel can be open and welcome all the tourists that are looking to come and, of course, host our new partners here in the UAE. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.